Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ and friends. My friends today are none other than Moving Medicine Forwards, Dr. Michael Klaper and Dr. Zach Burns. Please welcome them back to the show. Hello, gentlemen, and how was your Thanksgiving?
Let's
Hey, Chef
thank
AJ.
you. Go ahead.
We had a great time. Um, for several years now, my family's done a vegan Thanksgiving. I think some of the highlights were this lentil walnut loaf with the mushroom gravy, um, my dad's cranberry sauce with the apples, walnuts. There's too much. A big salad with cruciferous greens, pomegranates, balsamic. We were hungry, and but after the meal, instead of feeling annihilated like I used to, we were ready to take on the afternoon. But how were your Thanksgivings?
Oh my God, we had 32 people and they weren't all vegan. It was completely vegan. And I would contest that Thanksgiving is a vegan holiday because, with the exception of the unfortunate dead turkey, pretty much everything Thanksgiving traditionally was vegan. My friend Maureen made a vegan, a sugar-free, oil-free tiramisu. It was like the best thing I ever ate, honestly.
Nice.
Yeah,
No.
We
delicious.
did a we did a pecan pie from the Tecan Campbell website. Excellent. Highly recommend.
Hey, what am I, chopped liver? I got a two-ingredient pecan pie in my book, pecan and dates. Why go to all that trouble with all those ingredients?
It's a great
Wow.
point. It's a
Yeah,
great point. We'll make that next weekend.
well, yeah, or make it for Christmas.
There you go.
Pecan pie with two ingredients.
Yeah,
One of them is pecans, I assume.
The
yeah, and
other
the
one's
other
a
one
pie.
is dates. Even when we were both together at True North every year for the extravaganza, that was like one of the only things Dr. Goldhammer even allowed because there was nothing that he could find fault with.
Wow. I have to check out that recipe. That's
Yep,
great.
yep. Well, it's a good one. So tell me, gentlemen, what is the plant-based nutrition's greatest hurdle in your opinion?
Well, don't want to ruin the suspense, but that is the name of my presentation today. And I'll start by sharing my screen. There we go. You can see my screen, right?
Perfect. I'm going to take
Okay.
myself off.
So we'll go through the presentation. We won't dwell on any technical stuff. Some of these slides are from clinical audiences. We're not going to delve too deep unnecessarily, but I do want to paint the picture of exactly how the pharmaceutical industry, there it is, spoiler, has influenced so greatly the medical guidelines and therefore medical education, shaping the attitudes of doctors. Dr. Clapper and I are really concerned with how the next generation of doctors will go about practicing. Um, are we going to be prepared to tackle the chronic disease burden, or are we going to do business as usual? And so that was part of the inspiration for this talk. So, a reminder, I'm in Rochester, New York. I do family medicine. I also have the honor of working alongside Dr. Clapper in our nonprofit, Moving Medicine Forward. So, Dr. K, just chime in whenever the spirit moves you. So, plant-based nutrition. When I say this, I'm talking about the movement that we're all part of here, right? To make nutrition a bigger deal in healthcare, and then overlapping with so many other movements that I consider important. The vegan movement to liberate the billions of animals from confinement and suffering, the climate movement, all the environmental degradation secondary to industrial livestock production. But more focused today within the medical community. So we are growing. You can see it in the restaurants, in the shopping malls with vegan materials. There's just things are happening culturally. Uh, in terms of within medicine, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine has become a force. And when I was applying to residency just 4 years ago, uh, there were only 10 residency programs that had incorporated the lifestyle medicine curriculum. Now there are over 300 such programs. Same with these lifestyle medicine interest groups on college campuses and medical schools. more so there. There used to be about 50 when I was a volunteer on the board at ACLM. Now there are over 200. So things are moving exponentially, but we're still far from widespread. Okay. Yesterday, 46 million turkeys were eaten in the United States. We're not there yet, but and so I'm going to ask, why is this? Is it the medical insurance industry? Is it sort of doctors' attitudes? They don't want to talk about nutrition. Is it certain cultural phenomena with fear of fat shaming or being culturally insensitive? Or is it something else? And so I'm going to argue that the pharmaceutical industry, by far, is the largest impediment to widespread adoption of plant-based nutrition. So to do that, let's go through some of the history. Well, in 1980, there's the Bayh-Dole Act. What that did is it allowed universities to own the patents of inventions made there. And even if the inventions were made in labs that were federally funded. So that was a big change. But then federal funding decreased in the Reagan years as the private sector was being more and more bolstered. 1983, there was a pain reliever. It was the first drug ad. We consider it normal today. It wasn't legal until this era. And by 1985, half of biotech research faculty at top universities were consultants. One more slide on the timeline, 1991, well, the academic centers were still receiving 80% of drug company trial spending. It started to shift. Mid-90s, more than a third of clinical faculty received industry money. And by the late 90s, instead of the trials being conducted at these universities, academic centers, they were moved to contract research organizations, CROs. And over there, you didn't have as much oversight by the academy, so that the drug company could do their own thing. They could have the staff, the protocol, it was all theirs. And they found it to be much more convenient. So I'll pause there. Dr. Klaper, do you remember this era? When drug ads appeared on television, did you see things changing?
He's muted. Yeah, there you go.
I certainly saw this happening, and I don't want to get political here, but this really came in with Ronald Reagan and his brand of American enterprise. And his battle cry is government is not the answer to our problem, government is the problem. There is too much government. And he and his allies got out their cost-cutting swords and just hacked the government programs that were supporting not only academic study, namely university education and medical school education. When I went to medical school at the University of Illinois in 1970, the tuition was $200 for the quarter because the state of Illinois was paying the rest of it. It's a state-supported institution, and the individual taxpayer didn't have that big a burden. Well, that all got hacked back. Both the feds pulled back their money, the states pulled back their money. Now you've got these students facing these monstrous expensive and monstrous debts. Well, a similar thing happened with research here back then when I went to school. But again, in the 70s and 80s, the research was a stalwart pillar of every department of anything: pharmacology, physiology, anatomy. You had big government grants powering the research projects that these wonderful academicians were doing. But that's dried up, and the Republican philosophy seems to be government can't do anything right. And there's a grain of truth that, yes, when government runs amok, you just get layer upon layer of regulations and stipulations, and it really stifles progress. Absolutely, I agree that can happen. But in trying to remedy that and to just take out the machete and the meat cleaver and just hack down all the support with the idea, well, whatever government can do, private industry can do better. Well, then you wind up with where we're at now. And now you have private industry taking over the research. And the problem with unbridled capitalism. I mean, capitalism is very efficient and makes things happen. Yay, capitalism. But left unchecked, then the bottom line becomes the overarching goal. And as long as you can make money at it and we can increase our profits for our shareholders, then it's a good thing. And well, then you got to cut back expenses. So you start cutting back maintenance on your airlines. You start cutting back the safety equipment in the coal mines or whatever. So these stockholders are earning more money. But there comes a point when the airplanes start falling out of the sky and the coal mines explode. Unbridled capitalism is as bad as unbridled government function. They've got to meet in the middle. But here has gone way over to the other side. Now private industry is running the research game, and boy, there's 6 waves from Sunday. You can slant the results that you're probably going to go into in some detail. So yes, I saw that happen in the space of my medical career in the 80s and 90s. That's exactly what happened. And now we're just the way our politics have become besotted with money, sloshing all around. Well, so has medical research. And that's something that that should be pristine. There should be the pursuit of truth, not profit. But profit has infected research here, and we're all, quote, paying the price, unquote, literally, in high drug costs, as well as the data findings that are getting harder to trust because you wonder what the goal is of the researcher to prove what and to get more grant money with favorable findings. So yes, the game certainly can be slanted, and in my opinion, it has been slanted in the ways that you're probably going to illustrate more. So yes, I saw it happen. Not a pretty picture.
Thank you. And so in the 20 years after that, right, fast forward to 2021, and the International Committee for Medical Journal Editors says this has gotten out of hand. They say investigators may have little or no input into trial design, no access to the raw data, and limited participation in data interpretation. The changes not only erode the fabric of intellectual inquiry that has fostered so much high-quality clinical research, but also makes medical journeys party to potential misrepresentation. So they're saying that the trials have become so controlled by the industries that are trying to sell the product of that trial, right? The new medication. The conflict of interest is so great that we can't be sure there's much integrity at all in this research. Today, a few years later, after this quote, the pharmaceutical industry is worth $500 billion. So that's equivalent to the GDP of major countries like Sweden, Norway, Israel. So you can, just for context, that is a huge, that's a massive industry. They have a lot of political influence. They're certainly influencing our medical community. So today, around 70% of clinical trials are funded by the industry. And when they are, they're more likely to show favorable outcomes. We'll talk about how that works, how the trials are designed to facilitate the favorable outcome. But here's a study from 2023. It looked at many trials. I think there were 600 trials between the years 2019 and 2022. And they found that about 69% of trials received industry funding. 50% of all these clinical trials in this year, the most cited ones, were exclusively funded by the drug companies seeking to justify the use of a new drug. And when they were funded by industry, they were 3 times as likely to show favorable outcomes. Well, to paint the picture, you have the executives in the boardroom, bottom left, right? And they're conceiving of a new idea. So, think about how removed they are from healthcare itself. They're not in the clinic, in the hospital, working with patients. This is a business. And whatever they do is an investment. So they think, all right, we're going to make a new drug for, let's say, constipation, because we're going to come to one of those momentarily. And let's think about how to design the drug to get the study that we need to get for the FDA to approve it. So this happens. Patients are started on it. They go through these clinical trials. The young doctors are pitched on this new thing. The guidelines come out, and they're encouraged to be up on the emergent literature, rewarded for that at every level of training. The drug sells, okay, and then stock prices increase in the company, and shareholders are happy, and the company says, okay, so it's a data point for them. Okay, that worked. Let's do it again, and that's where we are. So the industry donates to medical associations that publish guidelines. Dr. Klaper, what's the significance of a medical guideline? How do we use those, and how important are they really in protocols?
Well, the medical guidelines come down to treatment guidelines as far as the new drug goes, and you have to trust them, especially if this drug you've just come on the market, you've never really used it before, you've used similar kind of drugs, but you certainly want to rely on these treatment guidelines that you hope the people who develop the drug and have supervised the clinical trials feel are the most appropriate and safe. They generally are, but again, everybody is different, and you've got to tailor it to the individual person, which the guidelines recommend that you do. But I've seen some where the dosage are just impossibly high. They just seem inordinately high. You sell more drug that way, but you're certainly going to get more side effects as well. So I've been led astray a couple times by treatment guidelines, but they're by and large, if you're prescribing a drug, you need those treatment guidelines. They seldom, however, take into effect the patient's diet and their lifestyle and how their alcohol intake, things that may influence how fast these drugs are metabolized. So they're often woefully short, but they certainly sell more drugs, and so I guess that's the main purpose from the manufacturer's point of view.
Right, and there are guidelines for, say, the new guidelines for type 2 diabetes, and it comes out by the American Diabetes Association. They're trusted groups for professionals, and you kind of go with it. And if you stray from those guidelines, there's liability. That's when you could be sued for medical malpractice if something goes wrong. So the guidelines become really important, and what they do is emphasize drugs as first line, second line, third line, right? They might say technically first line is lifestyle, but do they really give it a real chance with proper counseling and follow-up? Or do we basically revert to pharmaceutical products? So here's the American College of Cardiology. They have an industry advisory forum. This is right on the website. Bam, 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 bam. So these are drug and device companies that have each donated at least $25,000 per year to the ACC. And so do you think the American College of Cardiology might be sympathetic to their products when they put out the latest guidelines? The American Diabetes Association has this pathway to stop diabetes. Just the three sponsors below have contributed over $53 million. Eli Lilly, we'll talk later, has the Mounjaro and Zepbound, Novo Nordisk, Ozempic, and Wegovy, and Sanofi makes forms of insulin. These large companies are working with the medical associations to promote their their preferred treatment regimen.
Yeah, I just had breakfast. Yeah, I'm already getting a little queasy looking at the slide. It gets my stomach is churning. That this is the face of corruption. Talk about the fox in the hen house, whatever analogy you want to use. That to have these manufacturers of products, whether they're drugs or devices, in on the advisory committee of the it's not a government agency, but the quasi-government agency making recommendations, is how can that not corrupt the advice that is going to be coming out of this august body here? Here it's so blatant, and we see it in many other aspects of government, etc. Agriculture department has all the meat industry guys and etc. Determining the food guidelines, etc. They're right in at the root of the advisories, and here you see it in the pharmaceutical industry. Again, it makes you distrust. I have to shake my head, with the new administration or whatever. There's big rally. The CDC is corrupt. The FDA is corrupt. But what they're calling corruption, completely overlooks this very gross institutional corruption of having these for-profit entities dictating, if you will, the dictates of the regulatory or the advisory board from the professions. It's really sad. It's infuriating. It makes us want to vote in people who really care about the truth, because these folks care more about profit, it seems. Proceed.
These medical organizations need to be exquisitely objective. We look to them for guidance. They're bodies of specialists who have created these regimens and protocols and the latest science, and it's unclear whether we can totally trust them, right? I'm not saying the ACC, the ADA are, they're not evil. They have great people working with them. There's some people within these organizations must have great intentions. Same with the drug companies. Some people go to work, they're a molecular biologist, a biochemist. They want to create something that's going to be a transformative drug for cancer or an antibiotic. But on the business side, it's gotten way out of hand. So, and you'd think, okay, well, they're making these impressive new pharmaceutical agents. They must be solving our chronic disease problem. In fact, it's the opposite. As the industry has consolidated its power and had more of a say in guidelines, we've seen chronic disease rates continue to increase in prevalence. This is a type 2 diabetes chart. We're projected in 2030 to reach about 20% prevalence of type 2 diabetes, 1 out of 5 people. 2030, on the obesity chart, we're projected to reach 50% of adults in the US by 2030. It's only 2024, guys. This is not fate. We don't have to reach 50% obesity. We can stray from this course, but we need to get clear about the root of the problem and address it. Personal encounters. Well, it started in some of my first clinical rotations, which is 3rd year of med school. I was down in Florida. They set me up for primary care rotation at a mom and pop practice in South Florida, and I go in there. The preceptor, my attending, the doctor training me, he was a really sweet guy. His patients loved him. He was also incredibly sympathetic to drug reps, and they know it, right? They can smell sympathetic docs, and they will capitalize on that. So for decades, they'd been marching into his office to pitch him on the latest products, give him some samples, take the office to lunch. And the Linzess rep, I don't know, some people will have heard of Linzess. The generic name is linaclotide. That rep came in and she was really enthusiastic, of course, about this drug, and it's so remarkable, and it treats. So it has become FDA approved for constipation, either idiopathic, like cause unknown, or when you have IBS with predominance of constipation. So linaclotide, it basically gets the ions to rush into the intestinal lumen so that water follows that. And then you have a softer consistency in the stool, and it's easier to poop. All right, that's the idea. So this is one of the foundational studies, and it looks good, right? It looks like a legit study. There are all these impressive authors, and it's randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled. In order to pass the test, they need a 30% improvement from baseline in pain, one or more complete bowel movements per week. And they had to, these are some details we don't have to go through, but it's sort of modest criteria to get the drug approved. And the results, well, a third in the group taking the new drug met criteria. And a fifth of them had diarrhea, and 10% of them had to stop the drug entirely because it was intolerable. And that was sufficient. FDA approves the drug, and based on that trial, and they were allowed to sell. Well, there are a few issues. Ironwood was the company making this drug, and the trial was funded exclusively by them. So it just, it's like the conflict of interest is, we've just, in the medical community, we're largely uncritical of this. Yeah, that's kind of how it works. The drug company pays for their trials. Who else would pay for it? But you can't have trials with any integrity that way. It'd be like if Coca-Cola wanted to sell a new drink and they had to do some like food safety testing on it, and because they had some new chemical that didn't have sugar, it was an artificial sweetener or something, and they tested it themselves and they said, yeah, it's safe, take our word for it, and then they were allowed to do that. It shouldn't really work that way. The trial design is really important because if designed a certain way, you can increase the chance that the results will look good. Well, that was done by Ironwood. The analysis of the results were written by paid consultants of Ironwood, with some assistance from Ironwood itself. And here's the big thing. Let's say even if Linzess or linaclotide works, okay? We'll grant that it works beautifully. We still have no idea whether it works any better than simple lifestyle changes. And remember, this is for constipation. So we didn't compare Linzess to having an apple a day or taking a walk around the neighborhood. A lot of the people listening are familiar with, there's a lot we can do with lifestyle for healthy bowel movements. So despite all this, Linzess becomes a blockbuster drug. Last year, net revenue was $442 million.
Dr. Burns, can I ask you to go back 2 slides? One more. Yes. So for the public, this has been so insidious, but I've noticed it as a physician. Again, when I graduated in 1972, the only real presence of the drug company was Eli Lilly gave us our little black bag, and there with a stethoscope in it, and the ophthalmoscope was from Welch Allen, and that was about it. You didn't really. It was very unobtrusive. Then along comes the 80s and 90s. The drug reps start flooding in, and when I was practicing on Maui for 11 years, I couldn't help but notice how many of the drug reps were beautiful young women, and were seemed to be preferentially assigned to the male doctors. But it became an obvious feature there that was telling me already that they were that there were other factors at work that they wanted to get their drugs prescribed. And then the most egregious violation of public trust comes in these numbers here, where the doctor and the public on the TV commercials, the numbers that flashed, 33% of the drug group met the criteria of, they had less constipation. Yay, dun-dun-dun, oh, well, must be good. But down just below it, 20% of the people taking the drugs had diarrhea, compared to only 2.5% of the placebo group. That's huge, but they don't mention that. 10%, 1 out of 10 people stopped the drug because of adverse effects versus the 2% of the placebo. These are huge numbers. You don't mention that on the TV commercials. And then finally, without making the audience's eyes glaze over here, there's 2 other concepts at work. The relative risk versus absolute risk, where you give this drug to people, and the folks with the placebo had 4 heart attacks, and where the people on the drug groups, they had only 2. 50% reduction, well, in heart attacks, yay! Statistically that's true. But meanwhile, the numbers needed to treat, you had to treat 500 people, taking pills 3 times a day for 10 years to produce this quote 50% drop, which is the relative benefit. The absolute benefit was 2. They say we prevented 2 heart attacks. But again, 50%, sounds, far more impressive than it truly is. So there's, Mark Twain said, there's 3 ways to lie: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And this is number 3 here. You can lie with statistics. You can present a completely different picture of the reality of it, but that's often, especially when you see those commercials in around dinner time, for all the drugs for everything from appetite, stimulants, appetite suppression, they make you go to the bathroom, stop you from going to the bathroom, whatever it is, they'll flash these very impressive numbers. But when you look at it, you think, wait a minute, or the placebo group, well, that we had a 60% improvement in symptoms compared to only 50% compared to placebo. Wait a minute, 50% of people got better on a sugar pill. That's significant in itself, but it certainly diminishes the apparent effectiveness. So you can't take this stuff without a critical eye here, with an uncritical eye. So
On
again,
this subject, if you Google Linzess, remember this is a drug we're talking about for constipation. Linzess, hell in a pill. Google that. There's a Reddit post that is pretty hilarious. It likens the experience on this medication to the Manhattan Project in this patient's bathroom. He called it a nuclear apocalypse. He said it was horrible. And he said, and then at the end it says, too long, didn't read. Do not take this medication. It's just anecdotal, but I thought it was hilarious. And this is happening to people in real time. They're being prescribed meds that were not completely thought through. They weren't comprehensively counseled on alternatives, which you really need to be to make an informed choice. So if the doctor had said, we could try this, or you could go even half plant-based for a week, see how you feel, or just really simple things sometimes can alleviate constipation. But we're so quick to prescribe the latest and greatest drug. Speaking of which, so Entresto. Okay, so Entresto. I was in residency not too long ago, and there was a proper frenzy around this drug. It's for people with heart failure. The cardiac function is not working in different ways. Either the heart's not filling properly, or it's not pumping adequately. And it's a huge issue in our society, right? Because it's connected to obesity and atherosclerotic heart disease and overweight. And so, and it's very expensive for hospitals. And people come back and forth out of the hospital with this condition. So Entresto comes along and they claim we're going to save the day with heart failure. It's a combination drug. There's a classic blood pressure pill, valsartan, and it's combined with sacubitril, which is a neprilysin inhibitor. It basically helps you, it changes your physiology so you can adapt better to the heart failure physiology, and you're not remodeling. So we want to avoid cardiac remodeling, which is a maladaptive process in heart failure. And so this drug purports to help with that. I think it probably does on some level. I think the fanaticism around it is largely engineered by the manufacturer. We'll go through some of the trials to tell the story. So, this one showed, it can improve your physiology in heart failure to some extent. Evaluate the trial. So this one didn't show that you can loosen the walls of the aorta. But Paradigm was the big one for this company. They compared Entresto to enalapril. So this is an older blood pressure pill, and they find that so let's skip to that fourth point for the moment, because what they did find is that you could decrease the risk of hospitalization and cardiovascular mortality on Entresto compared to enalapril. But there were a couple issues. They did this run-in period, and everyone who didn't pass the run-in period was excluded from the trial. So that's about 20% of the initial participants dropped out because they couldn't tolerate the drug. And the FDA warned, because of this, that the run-in design makes it so that adverse reaction rates are lower than expected in practice, right? So this is a classic play by drug companies. They want to optimize the safety profile of their drugs, and so they can do that by screening out people who have side effects and not including them in the pool that they're going to announce at the end. But when you have results like these at the bottom, then the medical community goes nuts. And it's the kind of thing where we're summoned to lunch meetings, and we got to discuss the latest data around Entresto. And if you're a resident during morning rounds and you say, hey, Dr. Parker or whatever, why don't we start someone on Entresto, right? If that person has the right medical condition for it. And you score a lot of points by suggesting it, because it shows that you're kind of up on the literature. So there's this reward cycle that way. And the attending physician says, oh, it's a fine idea. And the resident says, oh, I'm going to throw in the order. And all this happens before they check whether insurance will cover this drug for the patient on an ongoing basis, because it's $800 a month otherwise. Most people can't come close to affording a drug like that, especially when the alternatives, which may work pretty similarly, are like $30 a month. So we'll get to some of those stats. But we get so excited about these new products. The tools that we're wielding, like that's our go-to right now in medicine. And we don't think through how the data came to be and how with the patient's experience on this thing, is it actually going to resolve their heart failure or keep them out of the hospital? Would it be more effective to do some basic lifestyle counseling so we could spare them the cost and the side effects and still keep them out of the hospital? These things don't always they just don't come up on a busy morning round. Well, the next trial was the Paragon, and I think that it's telling they use this word, right? They want to create a paradigm and a paragon. Which one? Yeah, here is the paradigm. Paragon. These are just grandiose names for trials that are designed by the manufacturer, right? They want to create a culture of using their drug for as many medical indications as possible. So this time they wanted to see, okay, well, there are kind of two categories of heart failure. They're the people whose cardiac function or their ejection fraction is low, and then the other people with preserved ejection fraction. So that was the latter was the population for this study. If your cardiac pump was working, is Entresto still helpful for you? Well, they didn't find a significant benefit compared to valsartan alone. Remember, valsartan is one of the components of Entresto. Life trial, they looked at. Yep, go ahead.
We're starting to get a little short on time. We get the idea that the drug companies can skew the results as they present. We get that idea. In the few minutes we have left here, is there, so tell us how the drug companies are the main impediment for the progression, for the acceptance of plant-based nutrition. And do you have any stories of in your own experience about how we're making some progress here?
Sure. Yeah. I won't dwell on the particulars. We do have about 45 minutes, and I'm gonna talk about and keep it personal, and we'll to bring in my own experience with this stuff, and but I do want to go through a couple more trials because I think the audience here, you guys get it. You deserve to know what's going on behind the scenes on some level, right? And so this is the last trial with Entresto, but my point here is that they did not check Entresto versus the component drug valsartan for people with regular so they looked at it with people with advanced heart failure and people with preserved ejection fraction, but not the more common one. So they're comparing apples and oranges and saying that we have a drug that fits. So this is what I mentioned before. It's just incredibly more costly to be on Entresto, such that Medicare spent $2 billion a couple of years ago on Entresto alone. Now, the Inflation Reduction Act actually allows Medicare to negotiate for the first time with drug companies so that Entresto becomes more reasonable, but it's still, you have to have Medicare Part D, and not everyone's gonna be eligible for that. And then even if Entresto were superior to something like valsartan or enalapril, we don't know that it's any better at all to basic dietary change because those studies weren't conducted. So GLP-1s, glucagon-like peptide 1, we've done some shows with Chef AJ on this, but from the trial standpoint, I just want to show you that what happened was with some earlier diabetes drugs, they were increasing heart failure risk. So now the FDA wants new diabetes drugs to undergo these non-inferiority trials. They just have to not be worse than the placebo. It's kind of a low bar. And the leader trial, when they established non-inferiority, it turned out it was actually superior, all right, to placebo with regard to cardiac events. So it decreased the cardiac events. And that created a lot of excitement in the medical community that these GLP-1s are good for the heart as well as for diabetes and obesity. That's the paradigm. Well, it didn't show any difference with non-lethal myocardial infarction, heart attack, a cerebrovascular accident, stroke. So those of us in the health professions, if you've seen someone with non-lethal heart attacks and strokes, there's often horrible disability and decreased quality of life. And this drug didn't have much of an effect there. It was funded by the manufacturer, but also NIH. The design, collection, analysis by the manufacturer. So some of these GLP-1s are now FDA approved for weight loss itself, not just diabetes. And there's a story to tell there with those drugs. So the FDA did put out a statement. There should be a lifestyle program if we're conducting a trial about weight loss. Okay, give them a little credit. And it should continue following randomization, and it should be emphasized, the lifestyle program, at appropriate intervals throughout the trial. So this is the typical program in the obesity drug trials. Okay, you cancel every month, you have a calorie deficit, and you do 150 minutes of activity per week. So even if we said, all right, good, they're doing a lifestyle program, I'm wondering, Dr. Klaper, is there any issue with just a nutrition protocol that involves a calorie deficit only and doesn't really mention the food itself?
Oh, absolutely. Whenever I see the term calorie deficit, the red flags go up, and I think it should in the minds of the lay readers as well. It's been well shown that yes, this is from the old idea that a calorie is a calorie. It doesn't matter if it comes from fat or sugar or protein, and just eat 500 less of them, and you're going to lose a pound a week at least, and that's all you need to do. But the problem is that these various foods, substances are metabolized different in the body. They have different effects. And when you just tell people eat less, and that's what they're saying here, eat, a portion of grains and potatoes, whatever, less every day, then you wind up with this gnawing hunger in the background, and it goes on for a day or two, and then people binge. And they make up the calorie deficit. And it just psychologically, physiologically, it just doesn't work. It's easy to say, well, just eat less, and eat 500 calories less. But human beings are human beings, and especially in this plethoric, the food plethora that we live in, it's very difficult to just eat less. And so, yeah, I'm very suspicious when I see calorie deficit.
Yeah, quality is really important in diet. Obviously, it's not just the quantity here. And so this is a series of trials called STEP, and there are 9 trials. We'll only go through a few pertinent ones, but Novo Nordisk here wants to make Wegovy the dominant obesity drug. It's a systematic project where they study different populations and attempt to justify the drug or a higher dose of the drug for those groups. Remember the boardroom photo, that cycle that I showed. This is incredibly strategic, what they're doing. It's not necessarily about helping people live their best lives. It's about increasing the value of the company. Okay, step 3. This is a more intensive lifestyle intervention. So that program that we just showed, this one, it ramps it up a little bit. It was 8 weeks on a more restricted calorie diet, followed by 60 weeks of it. They tone it down a little bit. And the physical activity, instead of being 150 minutes a week, it's 200. Well, they found that still the experimental group taking the drug did better than the lifestyle group alone. And so the intensive lifestyle change is probably unnecessary, because in step 1, they had found that with the basic lifestyle, the drug outperformed that group. And so this was what they were doing, is establishing that more intense lifestyle is unnecessary, and they wouldn't have to bring that into any subsequent studies. Step 8, they got a little lazy. The nutrition counseling was spaced every 4 to 6 weeks. By the way, we have no concept of what these counseling sessions entailed. The data is not reported. We don't know to what extent people in the study were following any of the calorie restriction or physical activity recommendations. They don't report any of that. And I think they sort of should, right? If they're saying that lifestyle was inferior, the drug outperformed it, then we need to know, okay, was it that people weren't doing the lifestyle change, or were they doing it meticulously and still it was inadequate? My sense is that they bring in these lifestyle programs into the trials in order to basically pay lip service to the FDA. Yeah, we're doing some lifestyle. It is a weight loss drug. We kind of have to make it look like there's some lifestyle involved, but ultimately it's about the drug at hand. So step teens, well, the population here was 12 to 17-year-olds. And this time they did a lifestyle run-in phase. That meant that about 10% of all the participants failed the screening or withdrew, so that in the actual randomized phase that they're going to talk about after the study and analyze, that's a skewed population, because it could be that after the run-in phase of lifestyle, which was lifestyle and the drug, that people didn't qualify anymore. They weren't obese, or they weren't overweight with a comorbidity, and so they were excluded from the actual trial, right? That skews the group that's being studied. And by the way, like, it would probably be good to instill some messages to 12 to 17-year-olds about healthy habits, instead of the message that you should be on this drug. And by the way, we don't have any long-term safety data around it. We don't know what it's like in pregnancy. Right now, it's contraindicated in pregnancy, but this is a group that could become inadvertently pregnant. It's a group that it seems like not a sustainable practice for teenagers. And then tirzepatide is the competitor, right? This is the one from Eli Lilly. So I ask, was this one studied any more rigorously? The SURMOUNT trials are the analog to Novo Nordisk STEP trials, and Mounjaro and Zepbound are the brand names for tirzepatide. So briefly, I'm basically going to tell you the name of the trial and then what they took from it. So we're as good as Wegovy. That was SURMOUNT 1. Remember, Wegovy is the competitor. SURMOUNT 2, even in patients with diabetes, we're good for weight loss. This is the takeaway, right? And you can use the higher dose version of tirzepatide or Zepbound, which costs more. SURMOUNT 3, this was their intensive lifestyle trial to mimic Nordisk Step 3. It was published in Nature. There's no information on the actual lifestyle intervention. And this time, instead of doing lifestyle and the drug concurrently, they did a 12-week lead-in with lifestyle alone, right? And people lost almost 7% of their body weight. But then for the subsequent 72 weeks, there's no lifestyle at all. And it's certainly not reported, right, if they did do some counseling. And they found, of course, that the drug helped people lose weight, whereas the placebo group regained some of their weight that they'd lost with lifestyle. So they're saying intensive lifestyle, it's not necessary here. Stick with the pill. It'll work better. SURMOUNT 4, we can now justify recommending the drug long-term because we used it for 88 weeks. In the other group, we stopped it then. People regained some weight. Predictably, this is one of the major issues clinically with weight loss drugs is people rapidly regain the weight when they stop one of these GLP-1s. GLP-1 GIP is the mechanism of this particular drug. The weight comes right back, and that doesn't seem like a good sustainable plan for weight loss. By the way, it's about $1,000 a month, sometimes more. So here's the counter argument section. So to answer you, Dr. Klaper, thanks for everyone's patience. Letting me go through my trials. I think it's key that people understand what is happening before the drug shows up on our television screen with people, dancing in an apple orchard because of their newfound health and weight loss. They've done these very sophisticated trials. They've gotten the approval, and now they're aggressively marketing the product to consumers themselves on TV, to doctors, through so many different avenues. And that creates the culture we're in, where drugs are often the first line. Oh, new diabetes? Let's start you up on Ozempic. So someone might ask, what about health insurance? Is that not the biggest impediment to the widespread adoption of plant-based nutrition? There's other large industries out there. I'm going to argue that the ignorance and our bias toward drugs, right, and ignorance around the power of food as medicine is engineered, part of this process I've been describing, and that health insurance is very dysfunctional, but it's not the biggest factor here. Well, what about junk food? It definitely is very powerful. The junk food industries, they do have a hand in influencing nutrition guidelines. They don't want to be associated with chronic disease, but they're not as concerned with dictating the treatment. Once you come down with heart failure or have a heart attack or you have diabetes or an autoimmune disease, the junk food industry isn't really part of that anymore. And it turns out that 97% of our health expenditure is for treatment as opposed to prevention. So the treatment and medical attitudes around treatment are really mostly shaped by pharma, right? And instead of junk food in this case. Well, what about social obstacles, like these fears that I mentioned earlier in the presentation? I can tell you firsthand, I went to family medicine residency in the Northeast, and there was a lot of these fears, and I think some of them are founded. We certainly have discouraged larger people from healthcare. We don't want them to avoid going to the doctor. We don't want to make them feel badly. I think it's very important. We have to be particularly sensitive and compassionate, but not being honest with the obese population is a disservice to them, right? Because they will get sicker. The medical costs and side effects will be more and more difficult. Families are going bankrupt because of all these costs and the avoidable surgical procedures and all this. So we have to be honest with them. But back to the question, is this really what's getting in the way of plant-based nutrition? Maybe in some residency programs like mine, but not in the real world, right? Like it's pharma and the influence that we've been talking about does much more to shape physician practices. Well, I really think that our movement, because remember, Dr. Klaper and I are deeply involved in medical education through this nonprofit Moving Medicine Forward. So we think a lot about this. What do we have to do to influence med students toward truth and away from bias, and help them have satisfying careers where their patients are actually getting better? I think we have to be really clear about this pharma paradigm, identify it, understand it, and critique it, be vocal about it so we can move forward. If we just promote plant-based nutrition in the positive sense, look, oh, the food is medicine, it's working so well, we may not reach a tipping point because drugs will continue to be marketed like there's no tomorrow. And I think it's going to be optimally compelling for med students, residents, if they understand that nutrition would already be a huge deal in medicine, plant-based nutrition in particular, if it weren't for this pharma hurdle. It would already be the paradigm to talk about an apple a day, to talk about basic lifestyle change as first and really second and third line for most of the major chronic illnesses in our society. But we don't do, because imagine if Dr. Klaper shows up at a medical school, he's in front of a group of 50 people, and you know, it's like these are sometimes it'll be an evening. It's just the second year students, and they're curious, but if they've never heard of this stuff or they have no sense of pharmaceutical shenanigans, then they might be skeptical. Like, really, why food is this powerful? Why hasn't anyone told us this? It can't be true, because yesterday in pharmacology class, we were learning about Linzess and Entresto and Manjaro. So could food really be so effective in preventing and reversing disease? That's why we have to make this clear at every stage of training. What to do? Well, it's not a comprehensive or elaborate list here, but we got to educate ourselves, our med students and residents. So now if I'm leading a journal club, what I have them do is read the conflict of interest section first. When any medical journal article, you go to the end and there's a chunky section, because they are required to state the conflicts of interest. So it'll say this first author is affiliated with this drug company, and that one gives speaking fees and went to whatever, is on the advisory board for this drug company. I think it's relevant information when we're analyzing a new trial. So I encourage people to do that first. You know, this is part of, I think everyone should know what's happening with drug. You get a sense, like, these commercials are kind of too good to be true, but I mean, they are. It's a glossy finish on a biased process that is primarily and ultimately interested in making as much money as possible, and then electing public officials who will confront pharma. I'm really not sure what's going to happen here. We don't have to get into that, but not optimistic. And these are my references. Thank you. This is my MMF email, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Klaper. Any thoughts? And thanks everyone for listening to that. I think this is a really important topic to me, and I hope you glean something from it.
So thank you, Dr. Burns, for the presentation. When you do look at the conflicts of interest on a given study and you see the two lead researchers, there's a whole paragraph of drug companies that they've collaborated with in the past. What do you do with that? Do you just not even read the study, or just say they're biased, or say that they're not biased? What do you do with when you find these conflicts?
Fair, yeah. So sometimes the conflict, you know, sometimes there's a NIH funded trial and there's actually no conflict of interest. There's no manufacturer involved, and often that's with meta-analyses, and they're looking from a distance at other trials that have already been conducted. So that gets tricky, because say there's no conflict of interest, so you can feel better about the integrity of the trial, but the randomized controlled trials that they're studying to make the meta-analysis and to establish a big takeaway for clinical practice, those trials were funded by industry. So, you know, you look at it and you think about it and you say, okay, well, this may be biased. It doesn't mean we're going to just throw away the study, but we have to read it in that context, is what I would say.
Great. Yeah, read it with a more careful eye, as calibrate.
And then especially the method section, which is, that's the most boring section, but I think it's important to, like, okay, how are they collecting and analyzing data? Because it has everything to do with the outcome that they're going to show and boast about.
True. All right. Well, very good. That widened our perspective as far as where medical research was and where it's going, and to be very selective in what we make our decisions on. Thank you.
Gentlemen, we actually have some questions that were sent in advance. People don't always know what the topic is in advance, and because you're both doctors, they like to ask you questions. So would you mind answering a few?
Sure.
Of course.
Okay. Well, Zach, the first one that was posted on Instagram is, can people see you as a doctor, and how do people get in touch with you?
Well, thanks for asking. I work in Rochester, New York, through the University of Rochester. So you kind of have to be in the area. I don't do telehealth, but you can always check out my website, herbivores.life, and send me a message. I have some creative writing and a blog there that you may appreciate.
Thank you. And Dr. Klaper, the same question was asked about you, if you're doing any kind of telemedicine or if people can see you in person.
I'm going to be starting telemedicine early next year in the spring. And so stay tuned. I'll put it on my website and I'll send it out to my mailing list. All the more reason to sign up the mailing list. But it'll probably be March or April. I'll start doing telemedicine again.
Perfect. Thank you both. Okay, so here's the questions. The first one is from Anonymous. When stressed, does cortisol make us store complex carbohydrates as fat?
So
In theory, it does. But the question of how, it depends, first of all, what you're eating. If you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, so naturally low in fat, that if you're under stress, but you have a third bowl of vegetable soup or a second banana, it really doesn't matter. It's not going to turn into fat. And so if you're eating fat and sugar and processed foods, if you're eating candy bars and milkshakes or whatever, yeah, that's going to stick to you. And the cortisol will have a bit of an additive effect, but there's all the more reason, one, don't eat those foods, and two, get a handle on the stress in your life, or whatever you're generating it over. But I don't want it to be just stress made me do it. Just my cortisol levels. It still comes down to your food choices and how you see your life that makes you generate these high cortisol levels. Stress happens in our head. We can choose to stress or not.
to add on to that, cortisol induces insulin resistance, right? So this is the physiologic state that leads to type 2 diabetes and to other conditions like PCOS. So some people may have had a cortisone shot in their knee or their shoulder, right? A joint injection, and then it spikes your sugar. Or if you've been on prednisone, it spikes your sugar. So it does make you insulin resistant. So it's all the more reason to make sure that stress and mental health are in check. We're not doing, just anecdotally from my practice, people are really hurting. People are not, the mental health is not great. It's kind of aligned with physical health in terms of the status of our society. And we need to tackle that. We have to make that a priority too, because it affects our physical health. The body's one interconnected being, right?
Thank you. All right, then we got a lot of anonymous ones today. The next one is also anonymous. And the person says, I am a senior working to be entirely plant-based. My gynecologist has prescribed an estering to help reduce my urge incontinence that severely limits my activities. However, with some memory loss and history of breast cancer and perhaps a TIA, I'm hesitant on the estering package insert warning that estrogen contributes to these issues. Doctor says there's no proof it has these effects. What are your thoughts?
Like any of these medications, you first of all start with the lowest dose you can possibly get, whether it's the pill or the cream or whatever. Although the S string, I think, just stays inside there. I don't know if that's the best vehicle for delivering this estrogen to start with, at least. I would suggest that she ask that the doctor prescribe a cream and that she use the smallest amount possible and slowly build up from there till she gets a steady state effect that produces the desired effect. And the studies that show that this drug produces this effect, again, that missing asterisk in a population of people eating meat and dairy and oil and sugars and a standard American diet, this drug produces those effects. But if someone's eating a lean, clean, plant-based diet, the odds of them getting any of these side effects or adverse effects are much, much smaller. So you've got to look for that hidden asterisk there. Remember that these studies are all done in standard American diet eaters. And if you're not on that train, probably these side effects or warnings are not as applicable to you.
Thank you. Any thoughts,
And
Dr. Burns?
yeah, just to tack on. I mean, I don't know the particulars of this audience member's question, right? And so we can never properly, like, fully answer. But for general advice, so I think she mentioned it was around incontinence, and I just want to emphasize that food and also our beverages play really significantly into incontinence and bladder irritation. So you want to make sure the diet is optimal. Sometimes overweight and obesity can exacerbate incontinence. You want to work on everything around the issue and not have bladder irritants like the colas and caffeine, right? And then then you can mitigate your symptoms, and some people may not need to go on the medication and subject themselves to risk. But in your case, you might have tried everything. I'm not sure.
Thank you. And we have one more question. One is from Victoria. And the question is, what are the best foods, beverages, and vitamin supplements to help heal a fractured arm?
Well, you need protein, calcium, vitamin K, and vitamin D, so, to start with. So any of the good vegan multivitamins should have, that assortment there. And it's up to you to, I would emphasize the protein containing foods, once a day. Try and go for something that features a legume, which are beans, peas, chickpeas, and lentils. So pretty much every day, have either a hummus sandwich, have a bean burrito, have a bowl of bean chili, have a couple of lentil stew. Find ways to get legumes and that wonderful legume protein into your body as often as you can. Dark green leafy vegetables are essential for the calcium and magnesium. Make sure you're eating plenty of greens. Still comes down to a really healthy whole food plant-based diet. Plus, I would probably take one of the good vegan multivitamins that has some vitamin K and zinc and D in it as well. And that would probably cover all the bases.
Thanks. Any thoughts, Dr. Burns?
Just that I was recently reviewing this article. It turns out the musculoskeletal system, right? Bones, ligaments, tendons, joints, it's so wound up in inflammation and diet. So you can when we talk about arthritis, kind of run in the mill osteoarthritis that so many people are afflicted with in middle age and older patients, it's not just the extra mechanical forces of extra weight on the knees, say. It's intrinsic inflammation in the knee joint that is happening in the physiologic state of obesity. So that's why it's so important to get these chronic conditions under control, to relieve the metabolic syndrome. And that's why we see people's aches and pains subside when they say go on a plant-based diet, because the inflammation subsides. it's really remarkable. I've seen it. I haven't been doing this so long, and I'm seeing it regularly.
Well, thank you. How do you get vitamin K with food? One of the viewers is asking.
Dark green leafy vegetables, your bacteria in your gut will turn the phytates and other substances in the greens into vitamin K. So eat those greens, chew them up well, chew them to a cream before you swallow
Whatever the question, greens are the answer.
them. Absolutely.
All
Can't go wrong.
Well, thank you both for a very interesting topic, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Okay.
Thank you, Chef AJ.
And thanks everyone for watching. And I'll be back Tuesday a little bit earlier at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Usually the show is 11 a Tuesday with Dr. Matt Letterman. And we have a very special announcement you won't want to miss. Take care.